Well, hello everyone, and good morning or good evening, whatever time zone you are watching. Hello, Facebook fam. Hello, YouTubers, subscribers. Hello to all of our tweeters, all of our Instagrammers. Welcome to Winning Wednesday. This is our segment at 12 noon. We are Central Time here in Birmingham, Alabama. And on today, we are declaring that you are a winner. We believe that you can win in whatever situation that you find yourself in, and that you are an overcomer. And so we know that you are a winner, but we like to use these Wednesdays just to remind you. Sometimes we need a reminder of the goodness of God and all that He has for us. And so this is our midweek segment. And so we like to bring you some valuable information, just to some valuable information to help you for our life, to help for our living. And so on today, we want to be discussing something in politics. We want to discuss something as pertaining to voting. And so some of you know that, of course, in this, back in the day, in the era of Jim Crow, there was a lot of ways that people tried to suppress the votes. And some of those were with the literacy tests with the poll tax. And this was done because certain people wanted to control how the vote would turn out. So I'm going to say that again. Certain people wanted to control how the vote would turn out. And so this is nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says. And so some of these tactics, of course, are designed to target a certain population, maybe those with fewer resources or those with lower income, people in a certain age bracket. And so the powers that be would like to make sure that those votes are not counted, because we know that those votes can change the course of history. For example, look at Georgia. Georgia flipped from red to blue. We all got excited about that. But now there are some new tactics that are trying to suppress our vote. And so our guest here on today is going to share with us what they are, how we can govern ourselves accordingly. And so I introduce to you all Miss Shay Cathey. She is the Senior Policy Advisor to the Dallas County Judge. So hello, Miss Shay. Unmute yourself.
Oh, I was talking. I was so inspired by your introduction, your prologues. I was just saying good morning. It's good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever time you're listening to us. It's good to be back with you on Winning Wednesday.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. And you were here with us a couple of years ago, right before I think it was in between, I think when we were having the election before Biden and Kamala. And so we kind of wanted to get everything together and, make sure we can get everybody on board to vote. And so, yeah, so I'm excited because it's some new things that came down the pipe. And so we want you to, of course, give us your expertise and your knowledge and all your political insight that you can, so you can help us make sense of it all.
Well, I don't thank you for using the word expertise. I'm gonna tell you what I know. So my mom always says, if you know something and you're the only one that knows it, then you're not doing your community any good. So I want to share with you some of the things that I have learned, and hopefully it will help you. So I'm gonna get started. Are you ready? You ready to get started?
I'm ready.
All right.
We all ready.
All right. So, like I said, I am happy to be with you. I think it was last year. Actually, I think it was around August last year that I had a chance to come. So, just information about me. If you would like to follow me, you can find me at Shay Cathey on Facebook. I'm at Shay Cathey on Twitter and at the Shay Cathey on Instagram. So, if you have follow-up questions, I would love to continue to talk with you. So, there we go. All right. So let's jump right into it. So like I said, this time last year, I think is when I was here last, and last August, we were about 6 months into the pandemic we know as COVID-19. And in August last year, then Vice President Biden had picked his running mate, which was then Senator Kamala Harris. And of course, we know they are now President Biden and Vice President Harris. And our COVID cases have been, we're starting to climb. They're starting to climb higher. The death toll, the case toll, it was continuing to rise in August. We're not through the thick of it now, but we certainly were in what we thought was the height of it in August 2020. And so we were about 2 months from a very, very important election, not just nationally, that was an important election, but you also had local races and state races that were going to be on this ballot. And so states were trying to figure out how are they going to manage elections amid these COVID-19 concerns. And of course, counties have to follow the guidance set by the state or previously established local rules on elections. So they were forced to pivot really quickly. 2020 was unlike any time we had ever seen. And I've been joking, Pam, that we need to find a new word for unprecedented because we keep using that word over and over again. So we need a new word because truly 2020 was unprecedented. So elections departments all across the nation, they were forced to pivot quickly. And so most states had to adjust their normal practices or their previous standing policies following guidance from their Secretary of States, because they had to hold these elections. So we weren't going to not have the elections, but there were concerns about voter safety, about worker safety. So they had to start to figure some things out because we were going to have this election. So that's what was going on around this time last year. And so let's look at election 2020. In the midst of this global pandemic, we had record turnout across the nation, record turnout. There were early voting, there were absentee or vote by mail, depending on what state you live in. People call it different things, but voting by mail, absentee balloting, and then of course, election day opportunities. And so if you look at this bottom left-hand picture, this is what it looks like all over the country for people who had to vote in person. They were masked up. They were trying to distance. You see people sitting down in chairs. They were going to make the most of their opportunity to vote on election 2020, because for one thing, we were deciding who our president was going to be. Was it going to be the current president, or was it going to be a new president? So America had to wait, though, 4 days as the results of states were being counted, because states, we discovered as we all watched together, states counted votes differently. Everybody didn't count the vote the same way because there's no federal standard for how you count votes. And I think for a lot of people, it was an eye-opener as we watched. I know in 2000, there was some discrepancy about the state of Florida. So we had seen it happen before where perhaps one state wasn't finished counting. And I think in 2004, there were a few states, I think it came after midnight or like on Wednesday, when that election was called. But we had never seen, in our recent history, where you have a vote on Tuesday and you're talking about 4 days. We did not know who the winner was, largely because of how the votes had to be counted, because there was such a record turnout and states were counting them in different ways. And remember, so many of them had adjusted and expanded access, which really increased participation. So there was no expectation really that it would take this long. But again, they had never counted this many votes. And because they expanded the access, more people chose to participate, which led to record turnout. So y'all remember, and depending on what station you watch, I chose pictures from CNN, but all of them have this ongoing coverage, right? Election 2020. So it was the election with the correct results, but it felt like the election that wouldn't end. So if you watch CNN, you saw that magic blue wall, and you saw how John King would touch it, and he was kind of telling you it was flipping. So I pulled a few of these slides because this is how long it took. Really, literally every vote was counted, and I think that's why some people are so let me find the right word, discouraged at people not feeling like the vote was counted properly, because we literally saw it with our own eyes. We could see, to the extent possible, you had cameras going inside some of those states in their counting centers, not to see the actual vote itself, but to see that they were doing their very best. You could see them, working these long hours. So for the election results to come out after we see how long it took, and then people to contest the election results, I think that was discouraging for a lot of Americans to say, hey, look, it took 4 days. They did what they were supposed to do. And then you have people who still thought that it wasn't done correctly, likely because they didn't get the outcome that they wanted. But Secretary of State after Secretary of State confirmed this is how they had chosen to count their ballots. I live in Texas. So in Texas, our early votes and our absentee ballot, our vote by mail, those are all counted up until election day. So at 7 o'clock, when the polls close in Texas, they release the early vote. They release the vote by mail that they have received, up through election day, because you have, I think, up to 7 days afterwards for those mail-in ballots to come in. So in Texas, we don't generally have going into Wednesday or Thursday not knowing results because of how Texas counts votes. But that's a personal decision, state by state decision. As you could see in some states, I think Pennsylvania was one, and I think maybe Georgia and Nevada were another one. They don't count their absentee ballots until after the polls close. So that's one of the reasons it took so long. And because they had so many more, it took longer. So people said, well, hey, if this is how y'all always doing it, why does it take so long? It's because there was such a record turnout. So I'm gonna get to that point. And of course, on Saturday, November 7th, all the networks felt comfortable in calling it. They called the former vice president, now President Joe Biden, was the projected winner based on all they had seen after all those days and days of the votes coming in. He was projected as the winner and confirmed, of course, with the Electoral College and through the Senate. So Americans voted, and this is from the Pew Research. So I'm gonna try to give it to you, and Pam, you might can see it and put it in the chat. People have questions, but anything I'm sharing with you is publicly available. So I'm not the researcher. I'm giving you data other people have researched. So the Pew Research Center says Americans voted in record numbers in this last election, nearly 158 million ballots. That's a lot. So that's about 6 in 10 people of voting age that actually cast a vote in 2020. It was 7 percentage points higher than 2016. And you may feel like, well, 7% isn't that much. That's a lot when you're talking about millions of people. And so that's 7 percentage point higher. And the Pew Research Center has only been keeping this data since 1980. So based on what they have found, it was the highest at least since 1980 and maybe longer. So the highest they had ever seen since they have been doing this research. And they said a lot of it was the turnout was due in part to the highly contested presidential race, which was obviously very important. The president is our nation's leader. So that's a really important election. But also another factor, it says, were the dramatic steps that states took to expand mail balloting and early voting because of the pandemic. So when the state said, okay, we're going to either extend our early voting hours or let more people vote by mail, people took advantage of it. One of my best friends lives in Pennsylvania, and she was saying how much easier it was to vote. Now, she votes all the time, but she was saying how much easier it was to vote, and she felt like her neighbors were voting in large numbers because they made it so much easier. So it's important to know this. Turnout increased in every state. Every state had a higher turnout. But in 10 of the states where it rose the most, according to Pew Research, those were the ones, 7 of them, that did almost entirely vote by mail, which means that anybody registered in that state got to vote by mail. 6 states had all vote by mail, and they did it either permanently or for the 2020 elections because of the risk to voters with COVID-19. So I'm gonna get to 2021, Pam, but I wanted to give you a little backup. So y'all who are out there, just hang on with me. I'm gonna tell you why this is important. So turnout increased in every state. So let's look. And again, this is available on Pew Research. I don't know how well it's projecting on your screen, so you may not be able to see it well, but this is all the states. I mean, this is the number of projection. Look, all the states, all of them increased to different degrees, but they all had a varying increase in voter turnout in this election, largely because access was expanded and there was so much at stake. So you have 2 things. We need to decide a president, and we expand access. And what happened? People showed up. That's one of the things that we complain about, is that elections are decided by the few. This election was not decided by the few. It was decided by the many, because people showed up. And if you spend a few minutes and you come back, when you listen to it again on Facebook, you can hit pause and you can find your state and you can see what percentage point increased. And as a result, lots of elections were impacted, and some of the parties changed hands, or they increased their strength. But remember, every state, it doesn't vote the same. We have red states and blue states and purple states, but all the states, even the red states, increased their voter turnout. The blue states increased their voter turnout. So it wasn't like just a few people had a chance to do this. They increased in every state. So so you have a really important race, which is the presidency, and then you have other races. And so on the general election day was Tuesday, November 3rd. I left out November there, but Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. And in Georgia, they had to have a runoff for the U.S. Senate for both seats. So the runoff was Tuesday, January the 5th. But Georgia had the same voting practices for both events or both elections, but both events because it was the same election. So they couldn't change any policies in the interim between November and between January because it's legally, technically the same election. So it took longer for the elections the same way for the results to come in for this Georgia runoff because they had the same practices. So they couldn't change how they did things and how they counted the votes. So while it took well into the night, I think it well into Wednesday morning for them to declare winners because it was the same procedures as that Georgia had for their general election. So, all right. So now here we get to what's happening now. Remember the show? It was what's happening, and then they came back and what's happening now. So that's what happened. So now we're in 2021, and we are saying, hey, what's happening now? So 2021, we have a new president and a new vice president. We have a new Senate Majority Leader. We have the returning Speaker of the House. We have a similarly staffed conservative Supreme Court. So how will states respond this year as it relates to voting? We saw what happened in 2020. We are still, even though we thought we would be better off, we are still in the thick of this COVID-19 pandemic. But we saw what happened when you have a really important election and you expand access, people turn out. So it's like, well, hey, what will states do? Now that they know that when you have important elections, if you expand access, people will turn out. Well, how will states respond? So let's see how they responded. In 2021, 18 states have already enacted 30 laws this year that will make it harder for Americans to vote. And this is according to the Brennan Center. Again, anything I'm giving you, it's available publicly online and you can find it out for yourself. But this was posted on July 22nd. So just 2-3 weeks ago, 18 states, I want that to resonate with you all. 18 states have already enacted 30 laws this year that will make it harder for Americans to vote. So it makes you think, well, we had this global pandemic that we still have currently, by the way, and we expanded access. And when we're talking about access, we mean access to the poll to vote, not changing who could vote, but just expanding access. Perhaps some states expanded early voting hours or added additional early voting locations. Or like we said, in some states, gave everyone the chance to vote by mail. So access to the ballot, not changing who can vote, but access. So 18 states in 2021, we're just in August. 18 states have already enacted 30 laws this year that will make it harder for Americans to vote, according to the Brennan Center. So you might say, well, who are those states? Well, let's just look at those states. Which states are they? Alabama, Arkansas. I feel like I'm singing that song, that roll call song of the states. Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida. Guess who we see? Georgia.
Yeah.
Iowa, Idaho, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Montana, New Hampshire, Nevada, Oklahoma, Texas, Utah, and Wyoming. So it's important if we just stop and think, and again, I'm giving you public information. We saw, like you said, like you mentioned in your introduction, Georgia had record turnout. And as a result of their record turnout, the results of their election were different than they had previously been because you had a really important election and you had expanded access for voters. Again, not letting anybody vote, the people who had the right as Americans, citizens who are duly registered to vote, and they had a change in their pathway. And how did they respond? By putting in harsher laws. Now, let's just stop and let that think for a minute. And you said it at the very beginning. The more people responded, some of these states said, well, we gave expanded access. So now we want to figure out how do we restrict that access because perhaps we don't like the results of the voters. And remember, we said in some elections, it was decided by the few. This election was decided by the many. And in a democracy, that's the goal. It is the goal that when people participate, you get the true feeling of what America, what your city, what your state wants for its leadership. So these are the states. So you might say, well, what when you say restrict voter rights or they have harsher voter rights, what does that actually mean? So again, I'm not sure how this is going to look on your screen, so I apologize. But again, this came from the Brennan Center. So these are some of the things that states have done in the last 8 months. So just think about this: in the last 8 months, they've shortened the window to apply for a mail ballot. So I think it's important that we stop here and say this too, because I hear people misusing the term the right to vote. The right to vote is guaranteed by the Constitution through the 15th Amendment. So that's your right to vote. The right to vote for people who were any previous condition of servitude. So that was a way to include all slaves. So and descendants of slaves. So the right to vote is a constitutional amendment. So the state can't take away a federal right, but the state has to effectuate and enforce your rights the same way the Constitution guarantees you the right to own a weapon, to own a gun. But your state may have limitations on background checks or certain days that you can buy guns, right? So your right it's a constitutional right, but your state has to effectuate that right. So these states aren't trying to take away our right to vote, because when we speak, we have to speak clearly, because when we speak incorrectly, then we lose our momentum and we lose our trust and our ability to influence people. So states aren't trying to take away your right, because your right's from the Constitution. The 15th gave it to former slaves, 19th secured it for women. Of course, the 26th lowered the voting age to 18, the 24th did away with poll tax. So these are rights, but the states have to figure out how to hold these elections. So this is what states have done, Pam, in the last 8 months. Shorten the window to apply for a mail ballot. So I'm not going to take away mail balloting, but your window to apply is now shorter in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Iowa, Kentucky, and Oklahoma. Shorten the deadline to deliver it, because when I was in college, you can ask your husband see if he remembers. When I was in college, I voted by mail. I voted absentee. So I would vote, in my dorm room. But even though I voted, even though I had the ballot, I still had to return it back to my home precinct in a certain amount of time. So what they have done is shortened the deadline to deliver that mail ballot in Arkansas. Okay, make it harder to remain on the absentee voter list. Some states have lists of people. If you get an absentee ballot or a mail ballot in one election, what they will do is keep sending you the application for mail ballots. So in Arizona and Florida, they made it harder to remain on this list. So you may have to reapply to keep getting those ballots. Eliminate or limit sending ballot applications to voters who don't specifically request them. That's Georgia, Iowa, and Kansas. Do you see the depth of this? This is the restrictions that we're talking about, not taking away your right to vote. Because what the proponents of these bills can say is, well, Pam, you still have the right to vote. We didn't take your right away. We are just changing your access to the ballot. Other things, restricting assistance in returning a voter's mail ballot. So, these are just things. Look at those states: Arkansas, Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Montana. Limit the number, location, or availability of mail ballot drop boxes. So in Dallas County, we only have one place. Dallas County has 2.7 million people. Now, everybody can't vote by mail, but we only have one place where you could drop off your mail ballot. And so one of the things they're trying to do in Texas is limit that, because other larger counties have multiple places that they had secured. So you see states now trying to say, well, no, we want you all to congregate in one long line, hoping that what? You may get tired or decide not to return it, or get it out of, you're out of the window of opportunity to be able to return that ballot. So we have other things to go through, but just, if you can just, like I said, when you come back and watch it, pause on this screen and you can look at all the things that they have done. Harsher voter ID requirements for mail voting, for in-person voting, expanding a voter purging the list, right? So someone may not have voted in a certain amount of time. So it should be like, once a voter, always a voter. So in some states, if you don't vote in so many elections, they will purge you from the list. So purging doesn't take away your right to vote, remember, but it denies your access because you have to go back and re-register. So look at all those states that are trying to expand the ability to purge voter lists: Arizona, Iowa, Florida, Kentucky, Louisiana, Texas. Utah. These are just things that are really so significant. And these are the types of ways that sometimes we see state leadership and state legislatures respond when elections don't go the way they presumed that they might go. You can look at, and in Georgia, I think this is the one that was the famous, right? Banning snacks and water to voters in line. Now, so now you may be limiting the number of polling places that we have. You may be reducing early voting hours. So I stand in line, but somebody can't bring me some water, can't bring me a snack. So, I mean, you know, these are small attempts. And again, not taking away your right to vote. But if you had to stand in line for 3 hours, you might get thirsty. Well, now you can't be provided with water based on some of these laws. I see in Montana that they are eliminating election day registration, which was previously available. In Texas, that's not available. And reducing polling place availability, just lots of things they are doing. So when you hear 18 states have enacted laws to impact or to make it harder to vote, you might say, oh, people just saying that. Here it is. Here's the proof. Here are the bill numbers in the states. And again, this is the Brennan Center, BRENNAN. You can Google it and you can find this information as well. So these laws, according to the Brennan Center, this is a direct quote, make mail voting and early voting more difficult, impose harsher voter ID requirements, and make faulty voter purges more likely, among other things. More than 400 bills with provisions that restrict voting have been introduced. That doesn't mean passed, but introduced in 49 states just since January. And depending on your state and when your legislature meets, I live in Texas. Ours meets 5 months every other year. So we have a short window to get legislation passed unless the governor calls a special session, which I'll discuss in a minute, which of course our governor has done. And in the special session, only the governor can set the agenda. In a regular session, anyone can file a bill. It may not all get through, but in a special session, the governor sets the agenda. So again, these laws just make it that much harder. They make it harder. And they also mean that if they allow these voter purges, there's usually some kind of mistake. So people can be accidentally taken off these voter rolls and again, have their access to the ballot denied. So like I said, everything's bigger in Texas, right? That's kind of our saying. Everything's bigger in Texas. And so if you have been following the news, if you watch Winning Wednesday, I'm sure that you are up to date and that you are someone who is aware of what's going on in your community. So in Texas, when our regular session ended on the last day, we had 51 Democrats who left because the Republicans in our state hold a majority in our House. So we had, in Texas, you have to have 100 members of our 150 member legislature present to do business. That's how they've always operated. You cannot, so that's our quorum for conducting business. You cannot do business, you don't have 100. So we had more than 51 walk out so that they could stop and try to and kill SB 7, I believe. I'm not sure the number in Texas. No, SB 1111. So I'm sorry, I'm getting the number wrong. The voting restriction bill in Texas, when these Democrats walked out. So after they walked out, they stopped it sufficiently for that session, but our governor called a special session. And on the agenda is voting rights. And he says that he will, they're calling it voting rights, other people calling it voter suffrage, voter suppression, but he wants to get abridgments to access passed in some type of bill in the Texas legislature. So he has said he's going to continue to call special sessions after special session until we get it done. He went so far, Pam, in our state in our state budget to line item veto the salaries of the legislature until they get a voting bill passed. So effective, I think, September 1, this is August, September 1, if they don't have a voting bill passed, anyone who works for a state senator, a state representative, that legislative branch, they will not be getting paid for their job. Wow. So this is how serious he is about getting a law passed, a bill out of both chambers and him signing it into law that he is threatened to withhold people's salary. Now, again, in Texas, our state reps and state senators don't have a salary. They have a stipend. So they make, I think it's $7,200 a year. So you have to have someone with a full-time job. But the people who work for them, their legislative staff, that's their full-time job. That's how they pay their mortgage. That's how they pay their bills. That's how they buy food. That's how they pay their car note. So both Republican and Democratic, if you're in the legislative branch, if they don't get this bill passed, he has line item vetoed, which they're not even sure he has the authority to do that, line item veto and not pay them. They will not get paid while they are working until that's how determined they are in Texas to get a bill passed. So many of our state reps continue to remain in Washington, D.C., trying to lobby the United States Congress to pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, because the federal protection will provide some of the things that could stop Texas and Georgia and some of the other states that have had some of these some of these restrictions in place. If there's a federal law, then the federal law will supersede the state law, because it will be, this is how you have to, these are some mandates that are required for elections. So they decided, well, if we're not going to be in Austin to have this quorum, then we're going to go to and take our case to the nation's capital. So many of them have been there since the end of June. And the first special session ended on Friday, and he called the second one to begin immediately on Saturday. So some Democrats have decided to return home because it is a financial expense to not be at home, to be taking care of your bills at home, and to be there. And for many, it's an emotional expense, because some of them are married, some of them have small children or have elderly parents and caretakers. So they still have enough to break quorum. They still don't have 100, but I think the last time they convened, they had 94. So if they get 6 more people to show up, they will be able to have quorum and then begin debating these voter restriction laws. So everything's bigger in Texas. So that's what's going on. All the eyes of Texas are upon you, but I think the eyes of the nation are upon Texas right now. So we've talked about the states that have done their voter restricting access, making it harder to vote. But I think it's important that we share this too. That 25 states have enacted 54 laws with provision to expand voting access. So it is not all bad news. Some states are expanding access to early and mail voting. Some of them are making voter registrations easier. Some are restoring voting rights to Americans with past convictions, among other measures. Many of the states in which voting is already comparatively more accessible are the same as acting those policies to further strengthen voting access, which is really kind of creating a divide. So it feels like those who already have pretty liberal voting laws are saying, look what happened. Remember, I said we had a really important election and we expanded access and we had record voter turnout. So some of those states are saying, well, hey, let's do that again. But some states with that same really important election and expanding access said, oh, we don't like how this went. We need to restrict the laws to get less people to vote. So it's really, you have to be able to decide for yourself, what do you think is the better pathway? Is it more people voting? Is it more of us participating? Is it more of us under the tent trying to decide how we want to provide directions for our cities, our counties, our states, and our nation? And so I think it's really important, though. So we don't want to give all bad news, Pam, on this Winning Wednesday, give people something to feel good about. Some states that were already doing a good job are now doing a great job. They said, hey, this worked for COVID during the pandemic. Guess what? Even when COVID goes away, because I believe that COVID will go away, right? So I am with you, standing in faith and hope that we will not always operate under this cloud of COVID-19. But they're saying, let's make this law. Some of the things that we did to make it easier because of COVID-19, let's strengthen our voting and our access, because that's what we want to do. So again, I apologize for the screen, how it looks, but these are some of the states and some of what some states are doing to expand early voting. So some of the states, and you can see them there, lots of states, even some red states So all of the news isn't bad on all fronts. Expanding early voting opportunities, either giving more days or extra hours. Lots of states there. You see it: Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, Oklahoma, and Virginia, to ease mail voting. And so this says miscellaneous because easing mail voting has different meanings in different states. So of course, this is a lot of different states, but these bills are about easing mail voting, expanding the mail ballot drop access. Remember, there were some states that wanted to limit it, so it makes it harder to get your ballot back. And then there are some states that said, hey, let's provide easier access and more safe, secure drop-off locations so people can return their mail ballot. Some are giving greater access to voters with disabilities, making sure that people who need assistance, physical assistance in voting, they don't have a difficult time in doing so. Improving language accessibility, protecting polling place access, prohibiting discrimination, easing the voter ID requirement. So there is some good news. And again, all publicly available at the Brennan Center with links to all these bills so you can read them for yourself and not have to just trust our interpretation of them. Some states are going to expand election day registration. I wish Texas would do that. And then improving the voter list maintenance. So it's important that we look at all sides. There are some states who are really trying to restrict access, but then there are some states who are trying to strengthen it because they understand that the more people we have voting, that really is a true democracy. So again, I mentioned Texas. One of the things they are doing is to trying to get the For the People Act of 2021 passed. It is HR 1. It was passed by the House on March the 3rd, and the Senate has one version of the bill, which is been designated as S1, and it has lots of the same language. But this bill is stuck in the Senate. So remember a few slides ago, we talked about the Senate, although we have a Senate majority leader who is Democratic, it is 50-50, which means that the tie, when they vote on something, the tie goes to the vice president as she is the president of the Senate. But this bill just cannot get out of the Senate. And I think this is what the Texas representatives who are in Washington, D.C., and many other people are asking, is that we need a clear call across the country so that you don't have states that could go in and make it harder one way, abridge votes this way, and do these other things. And so there are a lot of people that really feel like this For the People Act is the best way to make sure our elections stay full of integrity, but that we have some consistency across the nation in our voting access. And so again, it's hyperlinked. So you can see the underlines, and I know that may make it hard to read on the screen, but when you go back and watch this again, just hit pause and you can look at it. But it has 10 different titles that talks about the important parts of this For the People Act. It's modernizing voter registration. It's restoring the Voting Rights Act. It talks about territorial voting rights, election security, campaign transparency, empowering small donors, campaign finance, Supreme Court ethics, reform, lobbying disclosures, things like that, of the recusal of presidential appointees, executive branch ethics, congressional branch ethics, and presidential tax returns. So this is the For the People Act, and I think it's really important if we could have some modernization across the country. And so it came out of the House and it's stuck in the Senate, and so that is why the Texas representatives decided to go to Washington, D.C. and make their case. And they are talking about really some of the really bad parts of the bill that died because they broke quorum in that first session. Some of the things in that bill, it limited access on Sunday. And so in Texas, we have a thing, and you may have in Alabama, it's called Souls to the Polls. So we would have one Sunday where early voting was open, and people of all faiths who worship on Sunday, again, of both parties, would have a Souls to the Polls, and there was a push for people to leave their worship service and to go to the poll. Well, the original bill, if it had passed, would have restricted that on Sunday and put it like for 2 or 3 hours. Like it was a very small amount of time. And so that was one of those things that was like, wait a minute, I mean, Sunday, anybody can vote on Sunday, not just people of faith. So, I mean, so they were pointing out these things and just saying, we need some help from you. We are fighting this fight in Texas, but we need your help. So the For the People Act, these are the 10 sections of the For the People Act. And then, of course, there is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And this is such an important act. It is named for an iconic figure in our nation's history. John Lewis, of course, famous for many things, not the least of which was that the march and on Bloody Sunday across the Edmund Pettus Bridge right there in Alabama, and him being beaten so badly. But the John Lewis Voting Rights Act will restore key portions of the Voting Rights Act that came from the Shelby County v. Holder in 2013. And I just want to pause here for a minute. This was 2013 that the Supreme Court decided that part of Section 5, that I think all of Section 5 could be taken out of the Voting Rights Act. And that is when Shelby County sued President Obama's pick for the Justice Department, Eric Holder, which is why that's the name of it. That's how it's styled, Shelby County v. Holder. And this was filed after the election of President Obama. So if we go back to our previous slides, after President Obama was elected, Shelby County decided that, well, we don't need to operate, under this pre-clearance anymore. And so when we have it appears that when we have significant milestones in American history, that states then reconvene and figure out, how do we stop that from happening again? That's the best way to say that, right? So that's the heart of Shelby County have been operating under the Voting Rights Act since 1965, but it wasn't until the election of President Obama that they decided they wanted to challenge that, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court because of the bend now of the Supreme Court. So at the heart of the Voting Rights Act is the pre-clearance system established under Section 5 of the law. Under pre-clearance, states and localities with a history of voting discrimination must get certification in advance that any election change they wanted to make would not be discriminatory. So the VRA included a formula set out in Section 4 that identified which states were subject to this review. And let's just guess, friends, on Winning Wednesday, which states were those? The states from the South.
At least Georgia and Alabama.
And Texas, states in the South, states that had a consistent history of voter discrimination. And those were states that were also part of what? Part of the Confederacy. So a lot of this stems back to centuries of discrimination. And so these states had to get pre-clearance before they could change anything. So once this, the Shelby County v. Holder ruling came out from the Supreme Court, all the other states said, well, hey, this is the new law of the land, so we don't have to get pre-clearance anymore. So we can put in all these laws. Just think about it, Pam, if this was 2011, pre-Shelby v. Holder, or 2001, all of these laws that are being introduced would have to go to justice to get approved before they could become law in the state. So some of these things they are doing now, they wouldn't have even thought about doing because they knew they couldn't get clearance from justice. And I don't mean just the Justice Department in a Democratic presidency, the Justice Department in other presidencies as well. They had to go through the Justice Department before they could make some of these abridgments and limit access. And so they didn't do it. They just didn't even try. Some of them didn't even try to do it. Sure, they tried some bills, but all these bills that we've seen, what did it say? 400 bills that have been filed. You wouldn't have had that many because they knew they wouldn't have gotten pre-clearance. So the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is so important because it will restore pre-clearance, and it would make sure that states with a history of discrimination, with a history of targeting certain groups of people, certain races of people, that those states would not be able to change laws as the result of an election without getting pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. So this law is really, really, really important. like I said, in the Shelby County decision, it invalidated this formula, and it said it was too out of date. And the heart of this, some of the sentiment in this was that if America can elect a Black president, we no longer need to be subject to this preclearance because we are now in a post-racial society. So that was some of the sentiment behind the filing of the Shelby County lawsuit, because they were saying it's out of date. Look at it. We have a Black president. We have overcome as a country. We don't need these laws anymore. So for 50 years, these states, remember, these states, here they are: Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, a home state, and Virginia, and a number of other localities elsewhere. They couldn't pass these laws before Shelby County because they had to get pre-clearance. I mean, well, they could pass the laws, but they couldn't become law until they got pre-clearance. So now, according to the Brennan Center, these same states are now passing these restrictive laws because they no longer have pre-clearance is no longer required. So that's why I kind of wanted to back up in some of that 2020 stuff, so you could clearly see that as some of the states made gains, or as states have these record turnouts and elections changed, outcomes changed. When they changed, then these states that were previously under pre-clearance now are passing the laws because they perhaps don't like the outcome of these elections where access was expanded. And so this is what I said last year, Pam, remember at the end of what we talked about last year, if it wasn't clear before, if your grandmama told you and you just didn't believe her, Big Mama used to tell you didn't believe you, Pastor John used to tell you didn't believe him, your teacher at high school told you didn't believe him. The Black vote matters. Every vote matters. Please hear me. I am not separating that your vote doesn't matter, but I'm saying for a race of people, dare I say a nation of people, for a large segment of our nation, people who are the descendants of slaves who had to wait decades, centuries, and are still continuing to fight and feel the effect more than other ethnicities of some of these restrictive laws. Your vote matters, because when you voted in record numbers in 2020, what happened? They tried to change the game. So if you didn't think your vote mattered before, now you really know that your vote matters. Your vote matters. If you didn't know it before, you know it now, that your vote matters. So what do we do now? Here it is. What do we do now? So let's bring this home. Start at home, right? What do we do? You've heard this information. What do we do? Begin in your home state. What has your state done since 2020? Go find out. And if you don't know, again, you don't have to be an expert on these things. I'm not an expert. I'm reading and sharing with you what I read. Go to Brennan Center, figure out, has your state filed any laws? Are they restrictive? Do they restrict access, or do they expand access? Contact your state representative. We said this last year. Know who represents you. Contact your state rep. Contact your congressional rep. Call Washington, D.C. They have a Washington, D.C. office. They also have an office in your hometown. Call them. Contact your U.S. senator. If voting rights matters to you, expanding access, call them. Compel them to do something to make sure that we continue to have voting access. Do your own research. Do what I did. Find reputable organizations. Find those nonprofits that do research, that just put out data. find organizations, listen to trustworthy voices. If you're watching Winning Wednesday, you know the good work that this church does in your community. You know what they mean to your family, to your friends, their circle of influence. Continue to trust them. Go listen to see what they're putting out, sharing information. Again, we're not advocating for any political party. We're not advocating for any candidate. We are talking about doing research to see what affects you. Do not vote against your own best interest. And then make a plan for your next election. Figure out, hey, if your access has been limited, if hours change, figure out when the next election is, when you're going to vote, how you're going to vote, and who you're going to take with you. And then remember that every election matters. Everyone. The school board election, the city council election, they all matter. It is just really important that you do this. So Pam, that's what I got. I don't know if we have time for questions because there's a lot of information. But yeah, there we are. So it's been great sharing this with you. Again, Pew Research has a lot of good information. The Pew Research organization, the Brennan Center, any of those can really help you figure out how to know what's going on in your state, in your community. So.
Shay, this was great. No, I'm telling you, you have peeled back all the layers of voter access and how there are people are trying to have laws and implement policies just to deny us or to try to curb our access. We have the right. Thank you for explaining that and making that difference. No one can take away our right. However, they are trying to, or some people are, not all states, because you did point out the positive, how there are some states who are saying, well, hey, this is good. We're going to make sure there's more access, but there are some that are not. This was great. This was awesome. I mean, there's no room for questions. I did have one. So I know you mentioned the People Act, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Act. So with the John Lewis Act, do we still have to make sure that one is still implemented? Is that one, we need to vote on that to make it?
No, great question. I didn't say that. So they both have, the For the People Act has passed the House. Our issue is the Senate. The issue is the Senate. They won't remove the filibuster. So I think they want to keep that tradition, which again was born really after the Voting Rights Act. I mean, if you go back and look at when the filibuster was introduced, I think it was introduced in the 50s and 60s. It may have predated the Voting Rights Act, but it also came as a way to stifle some of the progress that was being made. So some of these traditions are still steeped in discrimination. So it's in the Senate. So it's important for us to contact our senators. If we can get this to the floor, then they will vote on it and it can become law. It's important that we find friendly voices who understand that everyone is entitled to have their right protected. And so it does feel like it's going on party lines, but it's important that we find friendly voices who understand the plight of Americans, especially those of us who are slave descendants, who have had to work really hard to make sure our right to vote was first given to us and that it's protected. So it's in the Senate, it is stuck in the Senate, but if it passes, then President Biden has assured that he will sign it into law.
Yes. Okay. So we need to contact our senators.
Contact your U.S. senators, correct.
Okay. I wrote that down because we'll be doing that. And then if, how do we know? So for example, something has been implemented, like for example, the mail-in ballot. So they have, made sure that the deadline is a little bit sooner. So how do I know about that kind of stuff so that when I get ready to send it off, that I'm like, oh my gosh, I've missed the deadline?
So once states pass laws, your county has to again effectuate and put those laws into practice. So start with your county elections department and ask them for the most updated information on mail-in ballots. Because I think like in Texas, sometimes those laws become effective on September 1st. Sometimes they go into effect sooner. So depending on when it goes into effect, if you have an election before that, but start local and work up. So start with your county election department and ask for the most up-to-date information. Are there any laws that have changed so I can ensure that my ballot gets back on time. If there's any changes, so start local and work your way up.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, this is good. And then I noticed, in some states, and particularly Georgia, because they're just right next to us. I noticed that, I hear a lot of people complaining there's one poll for all these massive amounts of people. How can we get more polling or more polls to that particular area? Is that a state level or local?
That's usually a county level, unless the state limits or restricts it, which again, some states are trying to do, trying to limit the number of polling locations. But generally, that's a local level. Again, in Texas, our counties determine the number of precincts and the number of polling places. So again, if you want more early voting locations in Texas, our commissioner's court decide the number of early voting locations. So if you're in Texas and you're watching, you would contact your county commissioner or the county judge, because they set the polling locations. And I'm sure it's the same way for other states, is that's done at the local level, either your city or your county. So if you want to encourage them to expand more locations, you need to contact your city elections department or your county election department, because they would be the ones that would determine the number of polling locations.
Okay. And so let me ask you, with all of these different changes, do you think, and this is your personal opinion, do you think it's going to limit the voter turnout? Do you think it's kind of going to make people be like, you know what, I'm not going through all this stuff, forget it?
So you know what? That's a really good question. I hope it will empower people. And like we said, you see kind of this pattern that when certain groups make gains, then other groups try to restrict or limit those gains. And so now I think that people are starting to see, like I said, when the whole world, got to watch them counting these votes for 4 days, people understood, oh, it's really important. Why are Texas's results in and Pennsylvania's not? How can they count votes before? So I think people understand how important it is to get involved with these things. And we certainly don't want to support any bill that abridges or limits our rights. But if those bills pass, now we know. So hopefully it will empower us to figure out what those new restrictions are and vote within those restrictions, so we can keep voting and perhaps change the leaders so that they will put in place voters laws that will continue to expand our access. So I hope we're not discouraged. It's easy to be discouraged. I hope we are empowered by this and driven to continue to vote more within whatever framework we now have to in our own state.
Right. Yes. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shay. This was so informative. We're going to try to put a few tweets. Actually, I didn't see any questions in our Facebook session. And so, but of course, if there's any questions, tell us again how we can contact you. I think it was at Shay Cathey.
I'm at Cathey at Twitter, so you can at me at Twitter. On Instagram, I'm at the Shay Cathey with the THE in front of it, and then I'm on Facebook at Shay Wire Cathey. But you all have access to me. So if you forget how to reach me, if you're watching Winning Wednesday and you know how to get in touch with the Masons, they know how to get in touch with me. So ask the question, and I will send you those links, those hyperlinks that are in the presentation. So if you want to tweet those out later, I know it's kind of hard to write them down, so I'll send those to you. And again, I'm not an expert, but I know how to find stuff. So if you're in a different state, you're not in Alabama or Texas, you have a question, we'll certainly try to direct you to the best place to get your question answered.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, we're just going to have a few announcements for our viewers, and then I want you to come back and then, of course, sum it all up, just kind of a couple of sentences, what we need to be doing. And so listen, guys, for those of you who are homebound, we had a message that just came in, and you want to get the vaccination for COVID. You're going to dial this number. It's area code 205-858-2221. Okay, so if you're homebound and you want to get the vaccination, the COVID vaccination, you're going to call this number. You can ask all your questions, what kind it is and all that stuff, who is administering it. But the number is 205-858-2221. Okay, And don't forget, people, we have our small groups. Our new segment of small groups is going to be this Saturday at 10 a.m. Our curriculum for this particular session is Taming the Tongue. And so we all need to learn how to do that from time to time, taming our tongue. And so that's going to be this Saturday at 10 a.m. It is via Zoom. We have a group session, and then we break out into small groups that are very confidential and very gender-based. So if you want that information, please contact myself, and you can also email me at ladypam@tcowi.org. Don't forget, we will see y'all on Sunday as well, as Pastor Mason is continuing the series Summer in the Psalms. And so he is going through a different division in the book of Psalm and just really talking about it, really going in depth with it. Of course, last Sunday was the realness about depression. So go back and look at all of these sermons, all these messages, all these winning Wednesdays, because we want you all to continue to be winners in every aspect of your life. So that's all we have on my end. Shay, can you please just give us a recap of what we need to do, what we need to do as far as our senators and contacting our county commissioners, and just any information you want to give us to sum it up?
So again, just thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just remember this, people, all politics is local. So just think about that. Start at home, figure out what your plan is, talk to your elections department, see if there's any laws that have impacted how you normally vote, start with them, then contact your state reps, contact your state senator, your US rep, your US senator. Let them know how you feel. You would be surprised at how they would respond to hearing from their constituents. And I just want to follow up on the church announcement in that I am someone who is personally vaccinated, my family, my husband, and my children. Let's stay safe. Please talk to your medical provider. Do not Google. Don't trust Dr. Google. Facebook is great for winning Wednesdays. It's not always great for medical advice. So talk to your medical advice. We can get through this. The Lord has not left us. He's a very present help in a time of trouble, and he has given us discernment. And so we ask that you walk in faith, but also be cautious. If you're not vaccinated, please take care of yourself. Take those precautions, because we need you to vote. We need you to help us. And we may look at the response to COVID-19 differently, but we all do love each other and we love the Lord. And so we certainly want us all to be safe, because we all need to be in this fight, because we're all God's children, and we're going to have to work together to make this country the best country that it can be.
Yes, and you are so right. And so thank you for that, because as a reminder, you know, we've been vaccinated here too on our end, and there are a group of people who cannot be vaccinated, you know, for immune system reasons. But like we like to always say, make sure you're staying safe, you're staying sane, and you're staying sanitized. So whatever that safeness looks like for you, then we need you to do it. You're right.
Absolutely. What the Bible said, that we'll know we're disciples by how we love each other. So let's love each other and show grace, and let's all work together to keep all of us safe, so we can come out of this and embrace the way that we are accustomed to and make this country the best that it really can be. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Shay. Until next time. See you later, Facebook, YouTube, Instagrammers, and Twitter family. Bye-bye.